The first rule Sofia taught herself on the marble floors of the Belmare Hotel was simple. Never cry in uniform. Not in the pale gray dress that never quite fit her shoulders. Not in the stiff white apron that smelled faintly of bleach and old perfume. Not under the quiet chandeliers where her reflection fractured endlessly across polished surfaces she cleaned, but never belonged to. Crying, she learned, made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people asked questions. Questions led to problems. Problems led to losing the job. So Sofia swallowed her tears the way she swallowed everything else. Every morning before sunrise, she stood in the narrow staff bathroom, tying her hair back with the same worn elastic, smoothing the creases from her uniform with damp hands. The mirror never lied. It showed the exhaustion under her eyes, the faint bruise on her wrist from lifting heavy carts the day before, the mouth that practiced smiling even when no one was watching. She whispered a promise to herself each day, the same words in her native language, spoken so softly they barely existed. Just get through today. The Belmare Hotel was a monument to wealth pretending to be taste. Italian marble floors imported stone by stone. Gold trim that caught the light just enough to remind you it was real. A restaurant so quiet you could hear the soft clink of crystal glasses before you ever heard laughter. Guests here didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Power, Sofia learned, spoke softly and listened to no one like her. That afternoon, the restaurant hummed with controlled luxury. Afternoon sunlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating linen-covered tables and floral arrangements that cost more than Sofia made in a month. Conversations floated low and confident. Business deals, investments, destinations named like trophies. Sofia moved between tables like a shadow, refilling water glasses, straightening chairs no one noticed were crooked. She knew how to disappear. It was a survival skill. That was when he arrived. He didn't enter loudly. He didn't need to. Tall, broad-shouldered, a tailored suit that fit like it had been sewn directly onto his body. An expensive watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist, subtle but unmistakable. The kind of man who didn't scan the room. He expected the room to adjust to him. He took the center table. 3 other men joined him, all polished, all relaxed, all clearly accustomed to being served without explanation. They laughed easily, leaning back in their chairs, speaking in a language Sofia recognized instantly. Her stomach tightened. It was her language. Or close enough to hurt. She told herself it didn't matter. Guests from everywhere passed through Belmare. Accents overlapped. Languages blended. She could handle this. She always did. Sofia approached their table with practiced calm, water pitcher balanced perfectly in her hand. "Good afternoon," she said softly in English, eyes lowered just enough to seem respectful but not submissive. "May I refill your glasses?" One of the men nodded without looking at her. But the man at the center, the one with the watch, tilted his head slightly. Not to acknowledge her. To inspect her. When Sofia finished pouring and stepped back, he waved her closer with 2 fingers, still not meeting her eyes. Then he spoke. In her language. Fast, deliberately complex. His pronunciation exaggerated just enough to be mocking. The words rolled off his tongue like a performance. The men around him grinned. One snorted into his napkin. Another leaned back and said something Sofia didn't fully catch, but she caught the laughter that followed. Her hands tightened around the handle of the pitcher. He was ordering, or pretending to. Layering unnecessary details, complicated substitutions, adding side comments woven into the request like hidden blades. "She probably won't get it," he said, still in that language, his tone dripping with amusement. "Let's see how many times she has to come back. These girls never understand." The word girls landed heavy. Sofia understood enough. More than enough. Her face burned, heat rushing to her ears. For a moment the room felt too bright, too open. Around them, other diners did what they always did when cruelty arrived dressed in silk. They looked away. A woman stirred her tea a little too carefully. A man adjusted his cufflinks. Someone pretended to be deeply invested in a phone screen. This was not a scene. This was not loud. This was acceptable humiliation. Sofia nodded once. That was the safest response. "Yes, sir," she murmured in English, accent soft and perfect. "I'll bring your order." She turned to leave. Her steps were measured, controlled. She could do this. She had endured worse. She had swallowed worse. "Wait." The word sliced through the air. She stopped. Slowly, Sofia turned back. The man finally looked directly at her. Up close, his smile wasn't warm. It was sharp, curious, like he was testing the edge of something. He switched to English. "Did you even understand what I said?" The table went silent. Not dramatic silence, dangerous silence. All eyes were suddenly on her, not with concern, but anticipation, like they were waiting for a punchline. Sofia felt the familiar pressure build in her chest, the instinct to apologize, to nod, to retreat. This was the moment she usually disappeared. But something inside her, quiet, patient, exhausted, shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was resolve. She thought of her mother back home, hands cracked from factory work, of the money folded carefully into envelopes, of the years she had spent learning to make herself smaller so others could feel larger. Sofia lifted her chin and spoke, in his language, fluently, calmly, clearly. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steady. "I understood everything." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. She continued, repeating his order perfectly, every detail, every unnecessary flourish. Then, gently, politely, she corrected one of his grammatical errors. The men around him froze. Sofia didn't rush. She explained the cultural nuance he had misused, the phrase that didn't mean what he thought it did. Her tone was respectful, professional, educated. She ended softly. "I understood everything, sir," she said. "I simply chose kindness over embarrassment." Silence fell like a held breath. The man's smile vanished. Around the table, confidence cracked. One man stared at his plate. Another cleared his throat. The laughter that had filled the space minutes earlier evaporated completely. For the first time since arriving in this country, Sofia stood tall. Not as a cleaner, not as an outsider, but as herself. The man at the center leaned back slowly, studying her like a puzzle he hadn't expected. No one spoke. And in that suspended moment, something unseen shifted, something fragile and dangerous. Because what he did next, what he decided before leaving that table, would change Sofia's life forever. The room waited, so did the man, and so did Sofia, standing between dignity and consequence. If you were standing right here seeing everything unfold, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And before we continue, please consider subscribing. I poured my heart into crafting this story for you, and your support truly keeps this channel alive. Before Sofia ever learned how to disappear inside luxury hotels, she learned how to be needed. She grew up in a small coastal town where the air always smelled of salt and old wood, where the houses leaned into each other as if they, too, were tired. Her childhood home had thin walls and a roof that sang during rainstorms. On good nights, the sound was comforting. On bad nights, it meant buckets on the floor and prayers whispered into the dark. Sofia was the oldest. That meant everything. It meant waking before dawn to help her mother prepare food to sell at the market. It meant learning how to read utility bills before she learned how to dream. It meant understanding hunger not as pain, but as something you could get used to. Her father had been a fisherman, strong hands, loud laugh, a man who believed the sea would always provide. Until it didn't. The day the boat didn't return, the town gathered quietly, as if noise might make grief worse. The ocean looked the same as it always had, calm, indifferent. Sofia remembered standing beside her mother on the shore, fingers clenched together so tightly they went numb. No body was found. Just an absence. And absences, Sofia learned, were harder to survive than endings. From that moment on, childhood ended gently but completely. There was no dramatic shift, no announcement, just more responsibility filling the spaces where safety used to live. Her mother took extra work. Sofia took on more at home. School became something squeezed between obligations. Dreams became impractical luxuries. But Sofia was bright. Teachers noticed. They praised her essays. They lingered over her test scores. One of them once told her, "You could go far." She smiled politely. She didn't say what she already knew. Far costs money. When her younger brother fell ill, nothing dramatic at first, just fatigue, then pain, the hospital bills arrived like quiet threats. Treatment, medication, transportation, every line item was another weight. Sofia was 18 when she made the decision that would define her life. She left, not with excitement, not with hope, with necessity. The job abroad promised stability, accommodation, wages that could support her family. It didn't promise dignity, but Sofia didn't ask for that. Her mother cried the morning she left, not loudly, not desperately, just silently, folding and unfolding a handkerchief while Sofia packed. "Come back," she whispered. Sofia nodded, knowing it wasn't a promise she could make. The foreign country greeted her with cold efficiency. Language barriers, long lines, a city that moved too fast to notice her confusion. The Belmere Hotel was not her first job. It was just the first place that paid enough. She cleaned offices where no one knew her name. She worked kitchens where insults were thrown casually like seasoning. She learned which buses ran late at night, which streets to avoid, how to keep her eyes down and her voice neutral. She learned how to survive. At Belmere, the uniform was clean, the pay was steady, the expectations were clear. Be invisible, be polite, be replaceable. Sofia sent money home every month without fail. Sometimes she skipped meals. Sometimes she worked double shifts. Sometimes she lay awake at night counting expenses instead of sheep. Her brother's health improved. Her mother sounded stronger on the phone. That was enough. Mostly. What no one knew, not her coworkers, not her supervisors, was that Sofia studied at night. She borrowed books. She watched lectures on her phone during breaks. She practiced languages she already spoke, refining them, expanding them. Because before survival took over, Sofia had loved words. Languages had once felt like doors. She refused to let them close. Still, none of that mattered in the dining room of the Belmere Hotel. Here she was a cleaner, a server, a woman whose accent erased her education. Back in the present, Sofia stood frozen in the restaurant, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The man at the center table hadn't spoken yet. She wondered fleetingly if this was the moment everything unraveled. Because dignity, she knew, was expensive. And she had just spent it. She thought of her mother's voice, of the envelopes of money, of the promise she could never make. If he complained, if he reported her, if management sided with wealth over truth, the cost wouldn't be hers alone. The room remained quiet, but tension thickened. The man's eyes lingered on her, unreadable. Sofia did not apologize. That alone felt revolutionary. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this night had already changed her, no matter what came next. Because she had spoken. And once you do that, silence is never quite the same again. What happens when survival collides with self-respect? When the price of silence suddenly feels higher than the cost of speaking? Which part of their past touched you the most? Share your feelings below. I'm listening. Sofia's alarm rang every morning at 4:47 a.m. Not 5, not half past, 4:47. She never remembered choosing that time, only that she had said it once and never changed it. Maybe it was because the bus came at 5:18. Maybe it was because odd numbers felt less final. Or maybe it was because waking up earlier than the world made the day feel slightly less heavy. She rose before the sound fully registered, silencing it quickly so it wouldn't wake the neighbors through the thin apartment walls. Her room was small, barely large enough for a bed, a narrow table, and a single chair. The window faced another building, so close she could see into someone else's kitchen if the lights were on. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting her body catch up with consciousness. Every joint ached. The ache wasn't sharp. It was worse than that, dull, familiar, permanent. The kind that settled in and made you forget what it felt like to move without pain. She washed her face with cold water. No time for warm, no time for luxury. She brushed her hair, tied it back, pulled on her uniform. Gray dress, white apron, invisible armor. In the kitchen, she boiled water for tea and counted the coins on the counter. Enough for transport, enough for bread later. Barely. She ate standing up. Outside, the city was still half asleep. Streetlights flickered. Delivery trucks rumbled past. The air carried the quiet exhaustion of people who worked before anyone noticed they existed. On the bus, Sofia sat near the back. She learned long ago not to take the front seats. Those were for people who felt entitled to space. She watched the city wake through the fogged window. Cafes opening, office lights blinking on, people with briefcases and purpose. She wondered what it felt like to go somewhere because you wanted to, not because you had to. At the Belmare Hotel, the staff entrance smelled of disinfectant and coffee. Sofia clocked in without a word, nodded at coworkers who nodded back. No one asked how she was. That question belonged to another life. Her shift began with floors, always floors. The marble shone under her mop, reflecting chandeliers and wealth in distorted fragments. She worked methodically, careful not to leave streaks. Supervisors noticed streaks. They didn't notice people. Guests passed her without looking. Shoes clicked. Perfume trailed behind them like signatures. Once, a woman stepped directly over her extended arm without apology as Sofia scrubbed near a doorway. Sofia said nothing. By midday, her hands burned from cleaning solutions. Her back protested every bend. Lunch was 15 minutes in the staff room, rice, leftovers, silence punctuated by sighs. Some coworkers talked about going home soon. Sofia had another shift. Afternoons blurred into evenings. The restaurant prep began, glassware polished, tables aligned. Sofia moved where she was told when she was told. Mistakes weren't tolerated. Not from someone like her. She had seen coworkers dismissed quietly. No drama, just a conversation in an office followed by an empty locker. Replaceable. That knowledge followed her everywhere. That night as she worked the restaurant floor, she felt the familiar loneliness settle in. Not sadness, loneliness's quieter cousin. The kind that whispered, "This is it. This is all there is." She thought of home, of the ocean, of her brother's laugh, of the voice messages her mother sent, always cheerful, always careful not to worry her. Sofia carried those messages like talismans. They were why she endured. They were why she stayed quiet. And yet, standing near the kitchen doors, waiting for instructions, she felt something different stir beneath the routine. A fatigue deeper than tiredness. A question she'd avoided for years. How long can a person live like this? She didn't know the answer. She only knew that the night hadn't finished with her yet. Not even close. because somewhere in the dining room, a man with an expensive watch was still seated. And consequences, Sofia was learning, moved slowly, but they always arrived. What happens when endurance turns into exhaustion, when survival starts to feel heavier than failure? Be honest, have you ever felt this overwhelmed? Comment yes or no. The man with the expensive watch did not raise his voice. That was the most dangerous part. He leaned back in his chair, fingers loosely folded, studying Sofia the way a collector studies an object, curious, calculating, mildly offended that it hadn't behaved as expected. Around him, the restaurant resumed its soft rhythm. Cutlery whispered against porcelain. A server passed with a tray of wine glasses. Somewhere, someone laughed too loudly and then corrected themselves. But the table at the center remained still. "You speak it well," the man finally said in English, his tone even. "Better than I expected." The words were not a compliment. They were a verdict. Sofia stood straight, hands clasped in front of her, posture perfect. Years of training, formal and informal, held her steady. "Thank you, sir," she replied. The men around the table shifted. One glanced at the others, uneasy now. The joke had stopped being funny. The man's gaze flicked briefly to them, then back to Sofia. "So tell me," he said, switching back into her language again, slow this time, deliberate. "How long have you been pretending not to understand?" The question was sharp, loaded. "A test." Sofia felt the eyes of nearby diners begin to drift toward them. The tension had a gravity of its own. "I don't pretend, sir," she answered in the same language, keeping her voice calm. "I listen." A murmur rippled through the table. The man smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting choice of words," he said. "Listening implies intelligence." He paused. "Do you consider yourself intelligent?" The cruelty was surgical. Public, measured, impossible to call out without sounding defensive. Sofia inhaled slowly. "Yes," she said, "I do." That single word landed heavier than any insult. One of the men at the table coughed. Another checked his phone, suddenly fascinated by the screen. The man leaned forward now, elbows on the table. "If that's true," he said, voice low, "perhaps you can explain something to me." He gestured broadly, intentionally drawing attention. "Why someone with your abilities is cleaning floors instead of doing something more suitable." Suitable. The word echoed. Sofia felt the familiar urge rise, the urge to justify, to explain poverty, immigration, responsibility, to expose her life like evidence. She didn't. "My work is honest," she said, "and it supports my family." The man tilted his head. "So it's a choice," he said. "You choose this." Sofia met his gaze. "I choose dignity," she replied. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere nearby. That was when he laughed. Not loudly, not warmly. Just enough to humiliate. "Dignity," he repeated, tasting the word. "You know where I come from. Dignity is earned." He gestured at the table. "Through success, wealth, power." He glanced down at her uniform. "This," he said, "is survival." The words sliced clean. Sofia felt them land, not just on her, but on every invisible worker in the room. She could feel eyes on her now, servers slowing, guests watching openly. The manager hovered at the edge of the room, sensing trouble but unwilling to step in too soon. Sofia's heart pounded. She was acutely aware of the balance she stood on. One wrong word, one perceived attitude. And she could lose everything. "I'll bring your order shortly, sir," she said carefully. She turned to leave. Again. Again he stopped her. "This time," he said sharply, "stay." The command was not loud, but it carried authority. Sofia froze. The manager took a hesitant step forward. "Sir," the manager began softly, "is there a problem?" The man didn't look at him. "I'm having a conversation," he said, "unless your staff is not allowed to speak." The manager faltered. Sofia felt the weight shift. Management would not protect her. The man stood. Slowly. He was taller now, more imposing. His presence loomed deliberate. "I dislike being made a fool of," he said quietly, "and I don't appreciate performances from staff." "I wasn't performing," Sofia replied. That was when the room truly fell silent. He stared at her. For a long moment, Sofia wondered if she had gone too far. Then he smiled again. "This is becoming interesting," he said. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more appropriate." The implication hung heavy. Private, controlled, unbalanced. Sofia felt fear coil in her stomach. But she also felt something else. Clarity. "I'm at work," she said. "If there's an issue, you can speak to my supervisor." The man's smile vanished. "I am speaking to him," he said, eyes never leaving hers. "Right now." The manager swallowed hard. Sofia realized then, this wasn't about language. It was about power. And power, when challenged, does not retreat quietly. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, placed it on the table. "Remember this name," he said, his voice flat, "because whether you keep this job or not is about to become my decision." He turned back to his seat, picked up his napkin, and placed it carefully beside his plate. "Now," he said dismissively, "bring the food." Sofia stood there, the card burning in her vision. Because she knew, deep in her bones, that this moment was only the beginning. What happens when dignity threatens power, when speaking the truth paints a target on your back? Sofia carried the man's order to the kitchen with hands that looked steady, but felt anything but. Inside, her thoughts raced ahead of her steps, the business card, the way the manager's face had gone pale, the quiet certainty in the man's voice when he said her job might no longer be hers. At Belmare, complaints from guests like him did not get investigated. They got obeyed. She passed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, where heat and noise swallowed the elegance of the dining room whole. Pans hissed. Orders were shouted. The smell of garlic and butter clung to the air. "Table 12, Sofia said, placing the ticket down. The head chef glanced at her once, then back to his station. "You look pale," he muttered. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. She was. Every minute felt borrowed now. As plates were assembled, Sofia's mind drifted, uninvited, to the consequences she could not afford. The rent due next week. The hospital follow-up her brother needed. The money she had already sent, already promised. She pictured her mother answering the phone, trying to sound strong if Sofia had to tell her the truth. "I lost my job." The thought made her chest tighten. When she returned to the dining room, the table was waiting. The man did not look at her as she set the plates down. Neither did his companions. The silence was intentional, punishing. Sofia placed each dish exactly where it belonged. Perfect angles, perfect spacing. Professional, unbreakable. As she finished, the man finally spoke. "You know," he said casually, "I've stayed in hotels all over the world." Sofia remained still. "And there's one thing they all have in common," he continued. "They survive on reputation." He took a bite of his food, chewed thoughtfully. "Bad experiences spread quickly," he added. "Wouldn't you agree?" Sofia nodded once. "Yes, sir." He smiled thinly. "I'm glad we understand each other." He waved her away. The manager approached her moments later, his expression tight. "Sofia," he said quietly, "office, now." Her stomach dropped. The walk felt longer than it was. Each step echoed with the weight of everything she stood to lose. Inside the manager's office, the door closed softly behind her. He didn't ask her to sit. "I've had a complaint," he began, fingers steepled. "A serious one." Sofia folded her hands. "He says you were disrespectful," the manager continued, "that you embarrassed him in front of his guests." "That is what happened," Sofia said carefully. The manager sighed. "Sofia," he said, lowering his voice, "you know how this works." She did. "It doesn't matter what you intended," he continued. "It matters how he felt." Silence stretched between them. "He's a very important client," the manager added, "very connected." Sofia thought of the business card. "I understand," she said. The manager studied her, as if weighing something. "You're a good worker," he said finally. "Reliable, quiet, we like that." The word quiet hung between them. "But," he said, "I need you to understand something." He leaned forward. "If he decides to pursue this, I won't be able to protect you." The truth landed heavily. Sofia nodded. "I'm sorry," she said, "if I caused trouble." The manager relaxed slightly. Apologies made things easier. "Go home after your shift," he said. "I'll speak to him." Sofia left the office with her heartbeat in her throat. Back in the dining room, the man's table was laughing again. Softer now, controlled, but the balance of power had returned to where he wanted it. He caught her eye briefly, smiled, as if to say, "Good, you remembered your place." The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Sofia moved through it mechanically, responding to cues, performing tasks by muscle memory alone. When her shift ended, she changed in silence, folded her uniform carefully, and stepped out into the night. The city lights felt harsher now, less forgiving. She walked home instead of taking the bus, needing the movement to quiet her thoughts. Halfway there, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. "Your brother has another appointment. The doctor says we should not delay." Sofia stopped on the sidewalk. The weight of it all pressed down at once. The job, the threat, the family depending on her. She looked up at the dark sky between buildings and felt, for the first time in years, something close to panic. Because kindness had a cost. And tonight, she wasn't sure she could afford it. When your dignity puts your family at risk, is standing up still the right choice? Do you think they handled the situation correctly so far? Why or why not? Sofia didn't sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed, fully dressed, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling that ran from one corner to the other like a scar. Outside, the city hummed, cars passing, voices drifting up from the street, the distant sound of someone laughing without reason. Her phone rested beside her, face down. She didn't turn it over. If she looked, there would be messages from her mother, from the hospital, from the world asking for things she didn't know how to give anymore. Instead, she listened to her own breathing. Slow, careful, controlled. She thought about the man's face when she spoke his language, the brief flicker of something she hadn't expected. Fear. Not of her, but of being seen. People like him weren't used to mirrors. Sofia rolled onto her side and closed her eyes. If this was the end of this job, she needed to be ready. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine failure, not as a disaster but as a door. Morning came without warning. She rose before the alarm, showered quickly, and dressed with the same precision she always did. But something had changed. Her movements were slower, intentional, not careful. When she arrived at the Belmere, the air felt different, charged. Whispers followed her down the hallway, not loud enough to confront, but loud enough to notice. She clocked in. No message from management. Yet, her first assignment was in the restaurant again. She knew what that meant. The man with the watch was already there. Same table, same companion, same quiet confidence. But this time, Sofia noticed something she hadn't before. His eyes flicked toward her as soon as she entered. He had been waiting. She approached the table, heart steady in a way that surprised her. "Good morning," she said. "May I get you anything to drink?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up the business card from the day before, the one he had left behind. He held it between two fingers, as if considering it. "You know," he said finally in English, "I spent all night thinking about you." The men around him stiffened slightly. Sofia kept her face neutral. "I don't doubt that," she replied evenly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You embarrassed me," he said quietly, "in front of people who matter." "I corrected you," Sofia said, respectfully. He leaned forward. "I don't pay to be corrected," he said. "I pay to be served." There it was. The truth stripped bare. Sofia nodded once. "And yet," she said, "here we are." A silence settled over the table. Other guests were watching now, pretending not to, but watching all the same. The man smiled again, but this time it looked strained. "Very well," he said. "Let's continue our little game." He switched languages again, rapid, complex, filled with idioms and obscure references. But this time his voice was sharper, meaner. He wasn't joking now. He was testing her limits. Sofia listened. Every word. Every inflection. When he finished, he looked at her expectantly. "Well," he said, "was that too difficult?" Sofia inhaled. Then she did something no one expected. She didn't just respond. She expanded. She replied in flawless, educated language, correcting not only his order but his assumptions. She explained regional variations. She referenced historical context. She clarified meanings that even native speakers often misunderstood. Her tone was not arrogant. It was generous. The table went completely still. One of the men whispered, "She's very fluent." Sofia turned to him and smiled kindly. "I studied," she said, "for many years." She turned back to the man. "Your order," she continued, "would traditionally be paired with a different wine. If you'd like, I can recommend one." The man stared at her. Truly stared. For the first time, his confidence cracked, not because he was challenged, but because he was outmatched. "You're educated," he said slowly. "Yes," Sofia replied. "Then why are you here?" he demanded. Sofia met his gaze without flinching. "Because education does not protect you from circumstance," she said, "and humility is not the opposite of intelligence." The words rippled through the room. Someone nearby set down their glass. The manager approached, panic flickering across his face. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. The man didn't answer him. He was still looking at Sofia. "You could have used this," he said, "your intelligence to make people feel small." "I know," Sofia said. "I chose not to." That was the moment. The moment when something irreversible happened. The man leaned back slowly. Then unexpectedly he laughed. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Softly. A genuine sound. "You know," he said, "I've met people with power and people with pride, rarely both." He picked up his napkin. "Bring the wine you recommended," he said. Sofia nodded. As she turned away, she felt it. The shift. Not victory. Recognition. And recognition, she was about to learn, had consequences of its own. Recognition is dangerous when it threatens pride. Sofia felt it the moment she returned from the kitchen with the wine. The man with the watch accepted the glass without looking at her. He swirled it, inhaled, nodded once. "Acceptable," he said. That single word traveled faster than the earlier insults ever had. The manager exhaled in relief. But Sofia didn't relax. Because the air around the table had changed, not softened but sharpened. The man was quiet now, observant. His companion spoke carefully, laughter restrained. What had once been a game had become something else entirely. Control was being recalculated. As Sofia moved away, she felt his eyes follow her, not with curiosity but with intent. That afternoon, the first whisper reached her. A coworker leaned close in the staff corridor. "Be careful," she murmured. "He asked for your file." Sofia stopped walking. "What do you mean?" she asked. The coworker shook her head. "I don't know. Management was pulled into a meeting, something about inappropriate behavior." The word struck like a slap. Inappropriate. By the time Sofia reached the locker room, the second whisper had arrived. "She thinks she's better than us now. She embarrassed a guest. She's going to get us all in trouble." Sofia closed her locker slowly. She had seen this before. Isolation always came before removal. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should have known your place." Her hands trembled for the first time since yesterday. She typed nothing back. That evening, as the restaurant filled again, the man returned, alone this time. No witnesses. No audience. He sat at a corner table, deliberately removed from the spotlight. Sofia was instructed to serve him. The manager didn't meet her eyes when he assigned her. She approached with a steady tray. "Good evening," she said. The man looked up, expression unreadable. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from him. Sofia froze. "I'm working," she said. "I know," he replied. "This will only take a moment." Her pulse thundered. The manager watched from across the room. Did nothing. Sofia sat. "You have a talent," the man said, "and talents attract attention." "I didn't ask for attention," Sofia replied. "No one ever does," he said, "but some people know how to use it." He leaned forward. "I offered you something today," he continued. "An acknowledgement, respect." Sofia said nothing. "And you humiliated me again," he finished, "by refusing to play along." "I served you professionally," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "and that's the problem." He stood. "I don't lose," he said softly. "I correct." He left without paying. Within minutes, the manager summoned her. The accusation came swiftly. "Harassment," the manager said. "Intimidation, creating a hostile environment for a guest." Sofia felt the room tilt. "That's not true," she said. "He's threatening legal action," the manager added, "and the hotel cannot afford that." The words were final. They suspended her pending investigation. No pay. No certainty. Just fear. That night Sofia walked home in the rain, uniform soaked, shoes slipping on wet pavement. Her phone rang. Her mother. "Sofia," she said gently, "the hospital called. They need the payment this week." Sofia closed her eyes. "I know," she whispered. She sat on her bed in the dark, rain tapping against the window. She had done nothing wrong. And yet everything was falling apart. Because power, when exposed, often strikes back hardest. Sofia had spent the night awake, replaying every word, every gesture, every accusation. Her small apartment felt heavier than the Belmare Hotel, and that was saying something. Papers stacked in the corner, bills, medical forms, her brother's prescriptions, looked back at her accusingly. She thought she would face the morning alone. But sometimes, the universe has a way of intervening in silence. The next day she was summoned, not by management, not by the man with the watch, but by someone else entirely. A knock came at the staff entrance, firm and measured. A woman stepped in. Not a guest, not a manager, not someone she recognized from the usual Belmare hierarchy. She wore a tailored coat, silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun, and eyes that seemed to see everything in one glance. "I'm here about Sofia," The room went still. The chefs paused mid-motion, the porters froze with carts in hand. The name carried weight. Sofia felt her breath catch. Who are you?" she asked quietly. "My name is Madame Renard," the woman said. "I know him." Sofia froze. The man, the one who had humiliated, threatened, and now jeopardized her life, was known to this woman. "He has a way of seeing people as they are," Madame Renard said, "and punishing them when he feels slighted. But he has limits. You crossed a line he did not expect." Sofia's hands clenched. "What do you mean?" Renard's gaze softened. "I mean that the story he's telling management, that the accusation is false, and I intend to make sure the truth is seen." Sofia blinked. Why help me?" Madame Renard smiled faintly. "Because I recognize integrity, because I know how the powerful can crush the powerless, and because, sometimes, it only takes one unexpected person to remind them that power is not always victory." That afternoon, she orchestrated a meeting. Management, Sofia, and the man with the watch were all present. Madame Renard did not raise her voice. She did not shout. She simply stood at the head of the room and spoke. "Let us begin with facts," she said calmly. "Sofia did not humiliate you. She served you, professionally, correctly. Your interpretation is biased by pride, not reality." The man stiffened. "Additionally," Renard continued, "I have confirmation that Sofia has maintained her position with integrity for months. Records show that she has never received a single complaint before today." She handed copies of logs, schedules, and service notes. The atmosphere shifted. Management squirmed. The man with the watch froze. The guests, who had been briefed for anonymity, nodded in quiet agreement. Madame Renard turned to Sofia. "You will continue your work without prejudice or penalty. Your suspension is lifted, your pay restored, and I suggest the same courtesy is extended to any staff affected by these false claims." Sofia's lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Only tears, quiet, unbidden, and for the first time in months, safe to release, fell. The man with the watch cleared his throat. "This is unexpected." Renard's eyes met his. "Expect the unexpected. That is how the world balances itself when the powerful forget humility." For the first time, Sofia felt the weight lift slightly. The chains of fear, of helplessness, of impending loss, they loosened. She realized that sometimes help comes in the form of someone who has the authority, the courage, and the wisdom to intervene. And sometimes it arrives just when you need it most. The next day at Belmer Hotel, the air was charged, not with the usual tension but with quiet anticipation. Staff moved with a subtle ease, smiles more genuine, steps lighter, because word had spread that the man with the watch was no longer untouchable. He arrived as always, confident. Tailored suit, polished shoes, the expensive watch glinting in the afternoon sun. But today there was a slight hesitation in his stride, a tightness in his shoulders. He approached the central table, expecting submission, expecting quiet compliance. Sofia served him with her usual grace, but this time she stood fully in herself. No fear, no self-doubt, no hesitation. Then it happened. Madame Renard arrived at the hotel's front desk with a small entourage and a camera crew from a respected business journal. She did not announce them loudly. She let the presence speak. Within moments, several of the man's colleagues and associates, invited for a high-level luncheon, were snapping pictures, nodding the scene. The man's smirk faltered. He looked around. Whispers began to circulate. Other guests began to murmur. Madame Renard approached the table directly. "Sir," she said, calm but firm, "it has come to my attention that there have been multiple false claims made against staff here. You are aware that spreading misinformation, threatening employees, and attempting to manipulate management has consequences, not only legally but publicly." The man's companions shifted uncomfortably. "He used his position of wealth," she continued, to intimidate a young woman who was performing her duties correctly. That behavior, sir, is unacceptable. She handed a folder to the hotel manager. Inside, email evidence, eyewitness accounts, and a recording of the previous day's interaction. The room went silent. The man opened his mouth, but no words came. Madame Renard's eyes were steady. "This story will be published," she said softly, "and your reputation, built on fear and arrogance, will face scrutiny. Legal action has already been considered if restitution is not taken seriously." Sofia watched, heart pounding. She felt no gloating, no desire to see humiliation for humiliation. She felt only relief. The man's face paled. The arrogance had been stripped layer by layer. The smirk was gone. "Enough," he muttered, voice low. "This is unnecessary." "Necessary," Renard corrected. "Justice is always necessary when power is abused, and the truth will always find its way." He rose abruptly, gathered his papers, and left the hotel without paying the staff's usual tip. His companions followed silently. The doors closed behind them with a finality that echoed in the dining room. Sofia exhaled, feeling the tension finally dissipate. The staff began to speak in hushed tones, nodding at her with respect. Managers offered smiles that carried newfound reassurance. Other guests glanced with curiosity, noting the quiet dignity of the young woman who had been the center of this ordeal. Madame Renard placed a hand on Sofia's shoulder. "Remember this," she said. "No one can diminish your value without your consent, not wealth, not pride, not intimidation. Never." Sofia nodded, tears threatening but stronger than before. Outside the hotel, the man with the watch was confronted by the reporters. Questions came in rapid succession, but he had no answers. His pride and wealth, once his shield, had failed him. The story of arrogance meeting integrity spread quickly, and by the end of the day, whispers of his humiliation reached social media, news outlets, and business circles. Sofia, meanwhile, returned to her tasks with a lightness she had not felt in months. She moved with the same grace, same professionalism, but now with confidence. The world had seen both her humility and her strength, and the balance had finally shifted. The morning after the man's downfall, Sofia arrived at the Belmare Hotel not with fear, but with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. The air felt lighter, almost sacred, as if the walls themselves had absorbed her struggle and now exhaled relief. Madame Renard met her at the staff entrance, her silver-streaked hair glinting in the sunlight. She handed Sofia a sealed envelope. "For you," she said softly. Sofia's hand shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter from the hotel's management and a personal note from Renard herself. The words on the letter shimmered. "Effective immediately, your position is reinstated with full pay, including back pay for the days of suspension. Additionally, your talents have been recognized, and we are offering you an advanced training and leadership program designed for employees with exceptional skills. You are valued, and your contributions are no longer invisible." Sofia felt the letter fall from her hands as tears spilled down her cheeks. The weight of months, years, of fear, invisibility, and exhaustion was lifted in a single, astonishing moment. But the surprises weren't over. Madame Renard gestured toward the hotel manager. "He sees your potential," she said, "and the board has agreed to sponsor you for a program abroad, an executive hospitality and languages course. This is your chance not only to rise professionally, but to continue helping your family." Sofia's mind raced. Her brother's medical bills, her mother's struggling small business, the dreams she had tucked away in childhood, they all suddenly felt possible. The next week was a whirlwind. Sofia met with trainers, mentors, and leaders from the hospitality industry. They marveled at her fluency, her composure, and her innate ability to connect with people, even those from the highest echelons of wealth. Each day, Sofia's confidence grew. Her voice, once soft and cautious, now carried warmth and authority. Her colleagues looked at her differently, not with pity, not with suspicion, but with respect. And then came the biggest surprise. Madame Renard arranged a meeting with the man who had tried to destroy her confidence. Sofia entered the room. The man, now noticeably subdued, extended a hand awkwardly. He began, but Sofia held up her hand gently. "No," she said, "there is nothing to say. What matters is the lesson you've learned and the choices you make going forward." He nodded, unable to speak further. Sofia left the room, a sense of liberation washing over her. This was not revenge. This was victory tempered with compassion. Within a month, Sofia's life had shifted dramatically. She had been offered a position as lead coordinator of the hotel's international guest relations department. Her salary increased enough to cover her brother's treatment and her mother's business expansions, leaving them secure for the first time in years. Her apartment no longer felt like a cage. She decorated it with small comforts she had long postponed: plants by the window, soft curtains, and a desk where she could study languages at her own pace. Her brother thrived. Regular hospital visits became celebrations of progress rather than anxious chores. He laughed more freely, no longer burdened by the shadow of debt and uncertainty. Her mother's voice on the phone was lighter, joyful, and full of relief. Sofia even began mentoring other young staff at the hotel, many of whom were foreign workers like her. She taught them language skills, customer service tips, and most importantly, how to stand with dignity even when faced with injustice. She became known not just as a staff member, but as a symbol of quiet strength and kindness in a world too often dominated by arrogance. Months later, Madame Renard approached her with a new opportunity, a chance to lead a community initiative for disadvantaged workers across the city. The goal was to provide education, mentorship, and legal advice to those vulnerable to exploitation, people like Sofia had once been. Sofia hesitated. She remembered the months of exhaustion, the nights spent counting coins, the fear of losing everything. But then she thought of the children, the families, the workers whose voices were unheard. "I'll do it," she said. And just like that, Sofia's story, once a quiet tale of survival, became a beacon. Her life was no longer defined by fear or invisibility. Every act of kindness she had chosen, every moment of restraint and dignity, had compounded into something far greater than herself. She was thriving. She was free. And she was determined to make sure that freedom, knowledge, and kindness reached others who needed it most. 6 months had passed since the incident that had changed Sofia's life forever. The Belmer Hotel buzzed with the familiar hum of luxury and elegance, but now Sofia moved through it with a serenity that drew quiet admiration. She had been promoted to head of guest relations and cultural programs, a position that allowed her to mentor staff, advise management, and implement initiatives that celebrated diversity and fairness. Her uniform was still sharp, her shoes polished, but they no longer felt like armor. They were symbols of accomplishment, of dignity reclaimed. Her apartment, once small and suffocating, was now a home. Plants thrived by the window, books lined the shelves, and a small table held envelopes of her latest charitable donations. Her brother, now in good health, had resumed school with a renewed enthusiasm. He laughed freely, teasing her as they shared breakfast in the sunlit kitchen. Her mother's small shop had expanded. She had hired extra help, stocked more inventory, and even opened a tiny cafe corner, something she had always dreamed of. Sofia visited often, proud of the independence her family had regained. Sofia herself had started evening classes in international relations and advanced languages, slowly transforming her survival skills into knowledge that could empower others. The hotel staff whispered about her with a mixture of admiration and awe. She had become a figure of guidance and encouragement for foreign workers, And for the first time, her story inspired others rather than being overshadowed by injustice. As for the man with the watch, the consequences had been quiet but undeniable. News of his public humiliation spread through business circles. His arrogant reputation had faltered, and clients began to distance themselves. Privately, he had attempted to reconcile, but Sofia politely declined. She didn't need vindication. She had gained something far greater: respect, opportunity, and the knowledge that integrity mattered more than intimidation. Madame Renard remained a mentor and friend. Occasionally, she would invite Sofia to dinner, a subtle reminder that life's unexpected allies often arrive when least expected. One quiet evening, Sofia stood by the window of her apartment, looking at the city below. Lights flickered in buildings, streets hummed with activity, and somewhere, a child laughed freely. She felt the full weight of what she had endured, and yet she felt light. She thought of her past, the nights of exhaustion, the fear, the humiliation. She thought of the choices she had made: kindness over retaliation, dignity over fear. And she realized that those moments of restraint had been the very things that brought her here. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was a young staff member from the hotel, holding a notebook and a tentative smile. "Miss Sophia," she said softly, I wanted to thank you for teaching me, for showing me that we don't have to be invisible." Sophia smiled, kneeling to meet her eyes. "You're never invisible," she said. "Never, not when you carry your kindness and your voice with you." Later, she sat at her desk, writing letters to her family, checking in on the programs she had initiated for hotel staff, and planning her next steps. She had learned that life could test you in unimaginable ways, but resilience, integrity, and compassion had their own rewards. And in that moment, Sophia knew her journey was far from over, but she would never face it with fear again. The city outside glimmered like a promise, and Sophia, once a quiet young woman cleaning marble floors, now stood tall, fully visible, fully alive, and fully capable of changing the world around her. Every hardship, every act of courage, every choice of kindness has a ripple effect. What life lesson will you personally take from this story? Share it with the community. Thank you so much for watching this story until the very end. If it moved you even a little, please consider subscribing. It truly helps me continue creating stories like this for you. And tell me in the comments what story you'd like me to create next.